All right, Alex, so we're going to talk about your kitchen written assignment. We're going to start with the reflective statement, then we'll look at the essay, and then I'll show you what I think it would score if it was submitted just like this, okay? All right, so your reflective statement is got some excellent details. I think the main component that I've really tried to emphasize to everybody is we need to just very literally restate this question as a statement. You know, my understanding of the cultural and contextual considerations of kitchen was enhanced through the interactive oral because I learned about Yoshimoto's life and growing up in a liberal left-wing household. We also discussed, in the interactive oral, we also discussed the social dynamics or the expectations of young people, you know, just how different it is that Banana was allowed to live with her boyfriend, or boyfriend was allowed to live with her, and we see that in kitchen. And then maybe another discussion about death and how that is also culturally, obviously culturally, predicated. I mean, it's different in Japan. So, and we learned about that. So, I would also suggest maybe kind of blocking this into maybe 3 paragraphs. One about history or Yoshimoto's actual life. One about the Japanese relationships, and then maybe one about death. And that's about it. Now, on to your essay. The 2 overarching issues, and here's my color scheme. Yellow is caution, green is good, blue is yellow and green together. So there's something good in there, but there's something that needs work, and I've yet to have an essay with so much blue because there's so many good points that I feel like need to be, you're really close to having some tremendous insights. It's first observation is that it's in a more passive construction. The novella Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto has a large focus on death. If we put Banana Yoshimoto into the subject position here and say Banana Yoshimoto's novella Kitchen focuses on death, it's very subtle but very powerful in that you're instantly establishing your appreciation of the author as the doer here, the one that is shaping this entire story and the ideas behind it. And that's going to significantly improve that appreciation of the author's score, and it's also going to help highlight your insight into what's going on. And it dovetails into what I see as a kind of the second observation, and that's how Yoshimoto shows Mikage's journey with religion or through spirituality. I'm not sure how we want to phrase it, but you've got some outstanding examples. This first piece in blue here is one that I would like to see just some sort of citation,
Okay.
and maybe even a statistic, a percentage, latest.
I was reluctant to put statistics because I couldn't find like national statistics, but I could find ones for like websites of Japanese people, so I wasn't sure if that would be a good source for statistics.
Gotcha. I think you could look at a almanac. New York Times has a pretty good world almanac, and it's not that it's infallible by any stretch or that it is definitive, but it's at least a reliable enough source that you could quote it just as a kind of give us a baseline and have a little bit of a
Credibility.
yeah, because it is I like the introduction. I like how you're very quickly and yet succinctly establishing that religion in Japan is not as easily identifiable by brand, to be crass, but by definition as it is in other parts of the world. So, and that is exactly what we see in Mikage, is this kind of pastiche, if you will, of religious beliefs. Okay, so kitchen shows this aspect of Japanese culture quite well. Okay, so again, I'd like to see is Yoshimoto shows. Highlights this aspect of Japanese culture. That's all. You have a tendency to use this qualifier.
Yeah.
It's kind of empty, but just bringing it up. Now, here is where my primary concern is you tend to kind of go back and forth on how you see or how you say you see Mikage's religious leanings. So she has no strong religious leanings, but still incorporates religion into her life in some minor sense. However, one of the first lines mentioning any form of spiritual beliefs, this is just more of a organizational / developmental issue. I think if you would just go ahead and make a claim, whether or not you absolutely believe it, but if you could say something to the effect of, in the beginning of the book, we witness Mikage thanking the gods. Our first introduction to Mikage's spirituality, if indeed it is here. I think it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I've looked at it again, and that's fine. In this quote, though, I think the rest of my comments essentially are related to the development of this idea of what is happening. What do we see happening? She thanks them here. She implores them in our next scene, right? You bring up the bewitching aspects, which is an interesting sidebar. I'll come back to that in just a minute. And then we have our conversation with Chika. And Chika says, I can't believe in the gods. And then at the end of their conversation, Mikage echoes that sentiment and says the exact same thing. Then, almost at the end, as she is trying to figure out which room is Yuichi's, we have this idea of fate kind of coming into play. So if that's the arc, then I come back to the first referent. And I feel like in some ways you're kind of giving her this. In this instance, she's praying more out of habit. It gives the reader an impression she does not particularly care one way or the other. I don't know. I don't. And it's not that I have to agree. I just think there's a little more here. It's a little more nuanced than her being naive, perhaps. And forgive me if I'm challenging it. I just don't think that we've got to stay closer to an analysis of what we have. And there's a lot of supposition that you're making here that we just don't know. And that's all. I think you could certainly highlight this is an issue of, or this is an example of syntax, sentence structure. We've got these dashes with this very whether they existed or not, I think is the phrase, the interjection, if you will, that Yoshimoto is, as you say, deliberately using to show that it's not a conventional, oh, the gods, I've got a pantheon at home that I, light incense to kind of thing, and more of a modern, I'm not sure, but I think if we focus on what we have and what Yoshimoto's done, it's going to improve your written assignment for this, The readers, the examiners love it when the candidate takes apart the actual text and what the author is doing to create this tone, this feeling of uncertainty that would make us, it's not that the supposition's wrong here. I don't think you're wrong. I think you're probably right. It's just that we don't have any evidence to back that up. What we do have is evidence that Yoshimoto is creating this ambivalent's not the right word, but uncertain, or am I helping at all? Is that making some sort of sense? I don't want to be overwhelmed, just dwell on it too much. But if we could look more at what's there. Okay, so in the same sense, in this next paragraph, your next example, you say, instead she only speaks of the effects it caused, such as her having to move. This is one of the stronger instances where you're kind of introducing her grief and how she's bottled it, so that when she ends up in the alley under the kitchen and she says, I implored the gods, please let me live. It's a very powerful scene. Here again, I think one of the key components of this is not just her sincerity, but what she's praying for, and it's life. It's not death. And as sad as she may be, and as much as it's not that she contemplates suicide per se, but the depths of her despair at points certainly seem to echo the thoughts of somebody that might be, kind of looking into that blackness. And I think what makes this prayer so strong is that it is closely preceded or followed by the realization that to live is to suffer. Life is going to have, especially her life, has some really, she's got some high highs, but she has some really low lows. But it is this imploring, please let me live, that I think is worth, again, bringing that out, what Yoshimoto's doing, what she's praying for. Rather than, I think, and here again, I think the emphasis is on not necessarily that there's a guardian angel or someone watching, so much as I just want to live. I don't want to die. I don't know. Our next paragraph is with I think supernatural, yes. Bewitchment, certainly. I don't know if we need to go quite down this, quite as literal here as with it almost seems, my impression of that sentence and the way it is put in parentheses is almost a lighthearted tone, trying to kind of make light of yourself. Like, I realize how cheesy this is, that it's, ooh, black, gloomy kind of thing. But I really did see a straight road, leading to Yuichi. My opinion. Regardless, I think, again, just like we had the dashes with the interjection, you have this parenthetical insertion that in many ways is meant to be Mikage's, thinking inside her thinking, kind of self-reflecting on her thoughts, but it also highlights Yoshimoto's manipulation of that first-person narrative, trying to, affect the tone in some way. If you want it to be more supernatural, or you see it that way, that's fine. I just highlight the fact that this is Yoshimoto at work. This is, again, a deliberate choice. It's gonna it's worth noting for sure. Here in yellow, I'm just not sure which brings the series of unfortunate deaths in Mikage's life.
I guess I was meaning that, before she talks to Chika, Mikage is not really in a bad mood or anything. She's pretty content with stuff, but then when she's having a conversation with Chika, she starts thinking about just things that happened to her.
Okay.
I can definitely
Maybe say that, something to that effect. This conversation instead of which. This conversation brings to, highlights, something to that effect. And then the last real chunk of this, I think, could be, I understand that when you transferred it into the Google Doc, the formatting got a little wonky. I see that. But I think this, starting with this, could be its own paragraph for emphasis in some ways, because it almost, it's not that it's your conclusion, but it's commentary, kind of a meta-analysis of this scene, and it really kind of highlights her. We might say that this is the low point of her relationship, if there is one. With the gods, at least as far as her literal saying it, right? I can't believe in the gods. The examples you have here are excellent. Regarding her passivity to activity, her change in character. And my only concern is that I think, like I've said before, it's not as, I don't think she ever really, put her hands in the problems of an absent God. I just think it's a little more nuanced. But I do think you're right that this marks a turning point in her scale of 1 to 10 taking action and doing things. And I think that's the important point. I'm just suggesting that if you are kind of retweaking some of these other paragraphs, then this would be the last point. And it's kind of what you're working up to, is that there is this very unique relationship or use of spirituality in Kitchen. Yoshimoto shows it through Mikage's I almost want to say invocations, it's almost like it's almost a prayer, but it's certainly out loud. And I think that's part of what gives it's more than just an idea, but it's not the same as a faith per se. Which brings up this very interesting paradox that she does talk about fate and fatedness. And maybe in some ways this is your ending is kind of your beginning of how you address it. Is it hazy intuition? Or fate? Is it some sort of, and I think the answer, at least in the novel, is somewhere in between. We're not shown. She never makes a claim for either. It is kind of ambivalent. I would just end it at peak of independence. I wouldn't bring in existentialism at this point. Yeah. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, concerns here? Okay. I'm going to stop. It takes it a minute to stop.
You said you were gonna tell me